You keep feeling that something is off even though nothing obvious has changed. That tension in your chest is not coming from fear. It is coming from a part of you that refuses to return to an older version of yourself. You sense it every time you try to pretend everything is still the same. Your reactions shifted. Your focus sharpened in ways you did not plan. You started noticing things you used to ignore. And the more you notice, the harder it becomes to stay blind. This is the moment most people break the cycle without realizing they were already in the middle of a transition. You think you are slipping, but what is actually happening is that the old pattern cannot hold who you are becoming. You are not weak. You are overloaded. You are not lost. You are stepping out of a version of yourself that was too small to contain your growth. And if you ignore these signals, you will snap back into habits that were never meant to follow you into the next stage of your life. This is why your body feels restless when you try to shrink again. This is why old conversations feel empty, why old roles feel tight, why the same daily motions feel heavier than before. You are not broken. You are outgrowing what once felt safe. And the mind always panics a little when safety no longer matches truth. You try to explain it away. You tell yourself you are tired. You tell yourself you are distracted. But deep down, you know you crossed an invisible line. Something moved. Something inside you refuses to be silent. That is why the things you tolerated before now feel unbearable. That is why you hesitate before saying yes to what drains you. That is why you avoid people who keep you small. These are not random mood swings. These are behavioral signals of an internal shift that already started. You do not lose interest in old patterns because you are unstable. You lose interest because you finally see the cost. And the moment you see the cost, you cannot unsee it. The cycle begins to crack exactly where you pretend nothing is happening. You force yourself to fit. You force yourself to smile. You force yourself to match the person you used to be. But something inside resists with a quiet strength. This resistance is not sabotage. It is alignment. It is your system pulling you toward what is real, even when your mind is scared of what comes next. The truth is simple. You are not breaking the cycle. The cycle is breaking you because you stayed in it too long. And the more honest you become about what no longer works, the more intense the pull becomes. You try to function as before, but your attention slips. Your patience thins. Your intuition grows louder than your thoughts. This is not chaos. This is clarity arriving in a form that feels uncomfortable. When clarity arrives, it rarely asks for permission. It reveals. It interrupts. It exposes the gap between who you were and who you can no longer pretend to be. You think you are losing stability, but what you are losing is the illusion of control you built around old expectations. That illusion protected you once, but now it traps you, and everything in you knows it. This is why you feel the quiet internal shift at the most inconvenient moments. This is why simple decisions feel heavier. This is why you question things you never questioned before. You are not overthinking. You are waking up to yourself. And waking up always comes with friction. The moment you recognize that friction not as failure but as transformation, the entire cycle changes shape. Instead of collapsing into old patterns, you begin to see where those patterns were holding you hostage. Every hesitation is information. Every discomfort is direction. Every moment of emotional resistance is your system saying you cannot keep repeating what no longer matches who you are. And if you ignore this, you break the cycle by default because you force yourself backward while everything inside pulls forward. Your job right now is not to perfect anything. Your job is to notice. Notice what drains you faster than before. Notice what no longer feels true. Notice who you become around people who expect the older version of you. These observations are not small. They are the entry points into the next stage of your internal shift. And once you see them, the process accelerates. You keep trying to slow this shift down because you hope the discomfort will fade if you stay still long enough. But the more you try to freeze yourself, the more pressure builds inside you. It feels like a quiet internal push you cannot trace to any single thought. yet it shapes everything you do. This is the moment when most people sabotage their own progress. They feel the pull, they sense the change, and they panic. They tell themselves it is safer to go back to familiar patterns. But familiar is not the same as right. Familiar is not the same as aligned. And you already feel how misaligned the old version of you has become. You feel it in the way your patience dissolves in situations you used to tolerate. You feel it in the way you pull back from conversations that once defined you. You feel it every time you try to return to an old comfort and instead feel a quiet rejection from inside your own chest. That rejection is not weakness. It is guidance. You are not failing to reconnect to who you were. You are outgrowing who you were. And when you ignore that, you fracture internally. You try to hold two realities, the one you have outgrown and the one you are not yet ready to admit you want. That internal split drains you more than any external pressure. That is why you wake up tired even when you sleep. That is why your thoughts feel scattered when nothing stressful is happening. Your system is running two versions of yourself at the same time. No one can do that without burning out. And the moment you realize this, something clicks. You see that the discomfort is not a sign to go backward. It is a sign to stop pretending you can stay unchanged. Every emotional paradox you feel right now is telling you the same thing. You are not breaking. You are stretching. You are not confused. You are confronting parts of yourself that no longer match your next stage. You are not falling apart. You are shedding versions that cannot come with you. But you need to acknowledge the signals you keep brushing aside. You feel the shift in your reactions. That is a sign. You feel the drop in connection with people who drain you. That is a sign. You feel the urge to step back from habits that once shaped your identity. That is a sign. These signals are not accidents. They are behavioral changes that appear only when a deeper transition has already started. The mistake is thinking you need permission to follow them. The truth is, you already did. You already chose a different direction the moment you stopped ignoring what hurt you. You already broke the stagnation the moment you noticed how old roles felt smaller. You already stepped into the next cycle the moment you admitted that something inside you had shifted. What you call uncertainty is actually the beginning of alignment. It feels dangerous because it disconnects you from the narrative that once defined you. It feels destabilizing because it removes the structure you built around staying predictable. But predictable and authentic are not the same. Safe and shrinking are not the same. Comfortable and honest are not the same. You feel this difference now more clearly than ever. That is why the old cycle feels impossible to maintain. That is why you cannot force yourself back into the patterns that once shaped your life. And when you try, it feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of others, betrayal of yourself. This is the moment when you must decide whether you trust your discomfort more than your fear. Discomfort is honest. Fear is repetitive. Discomfort moves you forward. Fear locks you in place. And if you choose fear now, you break the cycle without understanding why everything suddenly feels heavier. You think things stopped working. But the truth is simpler. You stopped fitting into a cycle that required you to stay small. You cannot unknow what you know now. You cannot unfeel the internal shift. You cannot return to a version of yourself that you already outgrew. This is why your system pushes you to step back from people who lower your standards. This is why old conversations drain you. This is why tolerating disrespect feels impossible. These are not random emotional swings. These are psychological indicators that your identity is updating faster than your habits. And if you ignore this update, you create friction that becomes unbearable. Your next stage is not waiting for motivation. It is waiting for honesty. Honesty about what you want. Honesty about what you will no longer accept. Honesty about the gap between your truth and your patterns. The moment you face that gap without excuses, the cycle realigns instead of breaking. You keep asking yourself why everything feels heavier right now, but the answer is already inside your own reactions. You are not tired of life. You are tired of pretending that the older version of you is still in charge. That version fit who you were, not who you are becoming. And every time you try to force yourself back into that outdated shape, your mind pushes back with quiet but undeniable resistance. This resistance is not dysfunction. It is information. It tells you that the next stage has already started, and you are the only one still negotiating with it. You sense this every time your tolerance drops around people who take more than they give. You sense it when a conversation that once felt normal now feels draining. You sense it when your instincts tell you to step away, even when you cannot explain why. These signals show up only when an internal update is already in motion. And ignoring them is the fastest way to break the cycle you are meant to evolve through. You start doubting yourself because the shift does not look dramatic on the outside. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. But something subtle shifted in your perception. You began noticing micro-behaviors you once overlooked. You pick up on tone changes. You sense emotional distance sooner. You detect patterns quicker. This is not anxiety. This is awareness. And awareness always disrupts the life built on old assumptions. You are no longer comfortable in situations where you used to shrink yourself. You no longer want to justify the behavior of people who keep taking your peace. You no longer want to repeat conversations that go nowhere. These changes are not mood swings. They are psychological indicators that your alignment is rising, and the old cycle cannot follow. You think you are becoming cold, distant, detached. But the truth is cleaner than that. You are becoming selective. You are becoming precise. You are becoming someone who finally listens to the internal signals you ignored for too long. This is what happens when you stop bending yourself to match the expectations that once shaped your identity. You feel unstable at first because you removed the structure that kept you small. But instability is not the enemy here. It is the doorway. The moment things stop making sense is the moment the old meaning dies. And that death feels uncomfortable because it forces you to reveal the truth you tried to hide even from yourself. The truth that you want more. The truth that you deserve more. The truth that you cannot keep playing the same role for people who never learned how to value you. The more honest you become internally, the clearer the external world becomes. You start seeing who drains you. You start noticing who benefits from your silence. You start realizing how often you lowered your standards just to maintain peace. These realizations hurt, but they are necessary. They show you exactly where your old cycle cracked long before you admitted it. And now that the cracks are visible, you cannot patch them with denial. You cannot force yourself to forget what you see now. You cannot pretend that the old environment still fits. This is the point where most people sabotage themselves. They try to go backward because forward feels uncertain. They try to minimize their growth because growth demands choices. They try to silence their inner knowing because it disrupts their habits. But you are past that point. Your reactions already changed. Your attention already sharpened. Your emotional boundaries already shifted. A transition that deep cannot be undone just because fear wants your life to stay predictable. You are not unpredictable. You are updating. And updates always feel chaotic before they feel coherent. The key is to understand that your internal shift is not asking you to change everything at once. It is asking you to stop lying to yourself about what is no longer working. This is where micro-practice becomes crucial. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to rebuild your identity overnight. You need to observe. Observe when you feel your energy drop around certain people. Observe when your instinct pulls you away from conversations that drain you. Observe when a part of you tightens every time you try to return to something old. These observations are the doorway to alignment. They show you where your truth lives now, and the longer you ignore them, the louder they become. This is why the inner tension keeps rising. It is not punishment. It is direction. Your system is telling you that the cycle you are living in is too small for everything you are becoming. And the moment you accept that, the discomfort transforms into clarity. You begin to understand that the heaviness was not a sign of failure. It was a sign of misalignment. And misalignment is always the precursor to a breakthrough. You feel the pressure building not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are finally out of excuses. The quiet shift inside you is no longer something you can ignore. It shows up in your voice when you speak less than before. It shows up in your reactions when you do not laugh at what once entertained you. It shows up in the way your body tenses around people who expect the older version of you. These patterns reveal the truth you avoided for too long. You are not confused. You are no longer willing to betray yourself just to keep familiar routines alive. That is why the old cycle feels suffocating now. It depended on your silence. It depended on your willingness to stay small. It depended on you pretending not to notice what you now see clearly. Your awareness upgraded faster than your habits, and that gap feels like pressure. But pressure is not the enemy. Pressure forces honesty. You can no longer tell yourself that certain people care when their actions contradict every promise. You can no longer pretend that drained emotions are just bad days. You can no longer justify patterns that undermine your peace. This honesty feels sharp at first because it cuts through every illusion you built to feel stable. But stability built on suppression is not real stability. It is survival mode dressed as certainty. And you lived in that state for longer than you admit. Now your system refuses to continue. Every psychological anomaly is a signal. The sudden impatience with empty conversations. The instinctive distance from people who expect you to carry their emotional weight. The discomfort you feel in places where you once hid your own needs. These signals are not random reactions. They are the internal alarms that go off when your life is no longer aligned with your truth. You are not falling apart. You are stepping out of a cycle that required you to abandon yourself daily. Once your awareness rises, the old roles lose power. You notice manipulation faster. You sense dismissal quicker. You recognize emotional imbalance instantly. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is a sign that your internal alignment is strengthening. And when alignment rises, everything that once blurred your clarity becomes impossible to tolerate. This is why withdrawal happens before breakthrough. Your system pulls back from what no longer matches your identity. You feel it as exhaustion, but it is actually recalibration. You feel it as distance, but it is actually protection. You feel it as confusion, but it is actually the removal of outdated attachments. The moment you stop resisting this recalibration, something inside you softens, not into weakness, but into truth. The truth that you no longer owe anyone the version of yourself that kept you small. The truth that your discomfort is a map. The truth that your internal shift is not asking you to become someone new, but to stop pretending you are someone old. But here is the part that most people ignore. A shift this deep demands behavioral honesty. You cannot evolve internally and continue acting externally like nothing changed. If you do, your system breaks. That is how the cycle collapses. Not because of fate or chaos, but because you force yourself to remain in a version of life that contradicts who you are becoming. And the internal conflict becomes unbearable. That is why you feel restless in situations that used to feel normal. That is why your patience runs out faster. That is why certain conversations make your entire body tighten. These are not emotional defects. These are behavioral indicators that your identity has already moved forward. And if you deny this movement, you create emotional friction that drains everything you have. This is the stage where you need grounding. Grounding does not mean slowing down. It means telling the truth without decorating it. You are changing. You are updating. You are becoming someone who refuses to carry the emotional weight of people who never learned to carry their own. You are becoming someone who stops shrinking to avoid conflict. You are becoming someone who walks away from cycles that once defined you. When you admit this without hesitation, the internal pressure releases. You finally understand that there was never anything wrong with you. The only thing wrong was the environment that demanded you stay blind to your own needs. And you are not blind anymore. That is why the shift feels irreversible. Because it is. Once you see your own misalignment, you cannot unsee it. Once you feel the internal shift, you cannot unfelt it. Once you understand the cost of staying small, you cannot pay it again. This is the moment where the next stage becomes inevitable. You are reaching the point where the shift is no longer subtle. Your choices feel different. Your emotions respond faster. Your instincts speak louder than your thoughts. This is the stage where most people either step into alignment or collapse back into the old cycle because they misinterpret the intensity. You feel a heaviness that does not come from sadness but from holding on to versions of yourself you no longer need. You feel a tension that does not come from conflict but from forcing yourself to behave as if nothing inside you has changed. You feel distance where you once felt connection because the roles you used to play are losing their meaning. These sensations are not failures, they are confirmations. They reveal that your internal shift is real, present, and active. You sense this shift when a simple request drains you more than it should. You sense it when you stop responding automatically to people who once expected your instant availability. You sense it when you hesitate before agreeing to things that once felt harmless. This hesitation is not insecurity, it is clarity learning to speak. And the more clearly it speaks, the more obvious it becomes that your old patterns do not fit the person you are becoming. Every refusal you feel rising in your chest is a sign that you are stepping out of the cycle that kept you predictable. Predictable to others, predictable to environments that depended on your silence, predictable to patterns that needed you to stay unaware. But you are not unaware anymore. You notice emotional shifts instantly. You notice when someone's presence feels heavy. You notice when your body tenses before a conversation even starts. This sensitivity is not overreaction. It is a behavioral upgrade. It gives you data you never allowed yourself to register before. And when you register that data, your standards rise without asking for permission. Rising standards always create disruption. People who benefited from your softness feel threatened. People who depended on your patience become uncomfortable. People who relied on your predictability begin to pull away. Do not mistake their reactions for signs that you are doing something wrong. Their discomfort is the echo of your alignment, and alignment is never quiet. It exposes the gaps you once ignored. It shows you who reciprocates and who only takes. It reveals which relationships were built on authenticity and which were built on your silence. This revelation hurts, but it frees you. It frees you from maintaining connections that stopped being good for you long ago. It frees you from habits that drain your emotional bandwidth. It frees you from roles that demanded self-abandonment. And as you free yourself, something powerful happens. The heaviness you carried begins to dissolve, not all at once, but steadily. You feel a subtle lightness in moments where you finally honor your truth. You feel a quiet confidence in decisions that once terrified you. You feel a rising strength where you once felt guilt. This is the real shift. Not dramatic, not chaotic, but deeply honest. You begin to see that the cycle you feared breaking was already broken the moment you became self-aware enough to question it. Awareness ends cycles long before action does. And now your actions are beginning to match your awareness. You step back from people who drain you. You say no without apologizing. You choose environments that feel real instead of familiar. You stop chasing validation from those who never offered reciprocity. These behaviors are not personality changes. They are alignment taking shape in your everyday life. And once alignment begins to shape your choices, your entire internal landscape changes. You no longer search for permission. You no longer wait for the right moment. You no longer justify your own discomfort. Instead, you observe it. You listen to it. You let it guide you. This is your micro-practice now. Not forcing change, not rushing transformation. Simply noticing. Noticing what expands you. Noticing what drains you. Noticing who feels safe and who feels heavy. Noticing what your body tells you before your mind creates excuses. This awareness is your anchor. It keeps you grounded even as everything shifts. And when you honor it, the internal pressure that once felt unbearable becomes a signal of direction rather than a source of confusion. This is how you rise without forcing anything. You rise by aligning with the truth you spent years avoiding. You rise by stepping into the identity that no longer fits inside the old cycle. You rise by realizing that nothing is wrong with you. What was wrong was the life that demanded you stay disconnected from yourself. You are no longer disconnected. That is why the shift feels permanent. It is. You cross the threshold, and there is no going back. The next stage begins the moment you accept that your internal movement is not random. It is intentional. It is precise. It is yours. Observe what changes next. Tune in. Recalibrate. Shift your perception.